Dr. Umar Johnson. Dr. Umar, how are you?
Good afternoon, my brother.
Man, thank you for calling in on short notice. We need your expertise on this subject. Now we have the Congressional Black Caucus and many black elected officials who are now condemning the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan because of statements that he's been making for 50 years. But all of a sudden, because they're getting some pushback and some criticism from some donors, from Planned Parenthood, from other liberal groups, now they're willing to throw Minister Farrakhan and everything that the NOI does under the bus. What is your position on this? Why is this going on? Why is this taking place?
I think it's embarrassing, and I think it speaks to the history of black leadership, politicians, preachers, the black bourgeoisie in general, of feeling the need to condemn any voice in the black community that is not supported by the white power structure. I find it very ironic and hypocritical that white people would want black politicians to condemn Minister Farrakhan when none of them saw fit to condemn President Trump for his remarks about black people or his remarks about Africa. They didn't see fit to condemn the police departments that murdered Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Philando Castile. How can you not hold yourself accountable for not speaking up against the murders and other types of systematic discrimination against black people? Actual actions, not words, but at the same time, you want black politicians and leaders to condemn the words of a man who does not control in any way, shape, or form any institution or resources that he could use to either take the life or impair the life of any white person. It is a double standard that we have been living by for more than 200 years. It goes all the way back to slavery, and it basically speaks to the ability of the power structure to control black leadership when they are not unapologetic about their leadership.
And this is why we end up with the leadership that we have. Because if you're unapologetic by what your agenda is, about what your agenda is, if you make it very clear who you're working for and the whose benefit you want your policies to go towards, you can't get the other black folks to be around supporting you. How do we get out of that mentality?
Well, one thing you stated earlier, which I think is key to this, is the fact that the Congressional Black Caucus receives funding from white people. A lot of this comes down to finances. A lot of it does. It's the same reason the NAACP and the Urban League do not support so-called radical, so-called revolutionary agendas, because they are financed by white philanthropists. The Congressional Black Caucus finds itself in the same predicament, financed by white philanthropists. So although most of them did not originally see a need to condemn Minister Farrakhan because, his message has not changed in quite some time, they did it because they felt it was necessary in order to keep the funding stream alive. And I think that speaks to a contradiction that we as black people have not adequately addressed, and that is whether or not a sincere black organization that considers itself to be truly committed to the liberation of African people, can it in good conscience accept money from non-African sources? And this is where the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, I believe, was ahead of his time, because he's one of the few leaders who said, we will not take a single penny from another race because it compromises your perspective, it compromises your stance, but most of all, it compromises the trust that your people can have in you, because the hand that pays is the hand that rules.
Mm. And that's one of the most important things I think is the takeaway, because I said this earlier in the show that you never know that your teammate, that your ally is a coward until the bullets start flying. And what we're seeing now is that as the bullets start flying at Farrakhan, we're seeing the true colors of these folks who we call leaders. We're seeing the true colors of these people that we call supporters. So how do we form a new political paradigm for our community that really pushes for the things that we need versus just being in the pocket of somebody else?
Well, one thing, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we've made in the post-civil rights movement is that we have elevated politicians to the level of leaders. Now, that is not without precedent, because obviously during Reconstruction, when we saw more blacks go to Congress and go to state legislatures than probably at any time, since then, except for maybe the 80s. Our politicians became leaders. However, although those politicians became leaders, many of them had radical agendas in the community that allowed us to trust them once they got elected. For example, Bishop Henry McNeill Turner, one of the grandfathers of Pan-Africanism, who was often called Marcus Garvey before Marcus Garvey. He's the one who called the U.S. flag a stinking dirty rag. And so, that was a different type of a politician. They used politics as a means to elevate the condition of life for black people. That's a far cry from these black politicians who simply use their time in office to largely enrich themselves. Some of them do some good things, but if we were to be honest, we have to admit that there's a fact that is undisputable. And that fact is that the rise of the black politician in the post-civil rights era has existed concomitantly with the demise of the condition of black people. How do you explain more black politicians than ever before in recent history with the demise in the quality of life for black people? The more politicians we get, the less quality of life we earn. And I think, again, that goes back to the financing, because the hand that pays is the hand that rules, and 95% of all black elected officials are not only Democrats, but they're also financed by the Democratic Party. Until we get serious enough about political empowerment where we finance the campaigns of our elected officials so they don't see the need to condemn Minister Farrakhan whenever their financiers take issue with his comments, we're going to keep reliving the same situation.
And to piggyback on what you were saying, since 1968, in 1968, black home ownership was 41.1%. In 2018, it's 41.2%. In 1968, black incarceration, 604 people out of every 100,000 people. In 2018, 1,730 black folks are incarcerated for every 100,000 black folks. Unemployment rate for black people in 1968, 6.7%. Unemployment rate for black folks in 2018, 6.9%. We ain't moved in 50 years because of the intransigence of our political class. All right, real quick, what are you up to? How can folks get in contact with you? How can people follow you?
Yes, sir. Folks can reach me by way of my email. My website is being worked on, but they can reach me at Dr. Umar Johnson at yahoo.com, as well as the phone number 8444. Dr. Umar. I'll be in Buffalo next week. There's a situation in Buffalo, New York, where the white teachers are demanding more suspensions and expulsions of black children, which is absolutely ironic when you look at the fact that black boys already have broken historical records in terms of education as it relates to disciplinary removals from school. But one thing for Atlanta that I want to serve notice on is that there's a school I'm looking at there to potentially be the first site for the Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy. So Atlanta actually is probably at the top of the list right now, but there are a few other properties that I'm looking at. So we'll just continue to push, continuing to pull, and one day soon we'll be able to make the announcement about the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy.
All right. Thank you so much for calling in. Let us know what we can do to help out. Thanks with Dr. Umar Johnson.
Thank you, attorney. Take care now.
Thank you. All right.